Welcome, and thanks for joining me. My name is Jason Stevens. I'm an associate professor at the University of Auckland, and it's my pleasure to be with you today to talk about how to cheat and not feel guilty. It's an article I published in Theory and Practice in 2017, and I'm honored that UPenn and the Lecture Circus asked me to present on it today. Without further ado, in my brief talk, I want to talk about really four truths of dishonesty, and then get into the heart of the matter of cognitive dissonance and how we ameliorate it through causal attributions via moral disengagement, and thus cheat and not feel guilty. And then end on a positive note, I hope, on how we might prevent that and how we might, in fact, help students to achieve with integrity. So after that 2017 article, I followed it up with a bit more of an explanation of how I see cheating as natural and normal, but unethical and inevitable. And I want to say a bit more about the first and the third truth here. That is to say that it's a product of evolution, but nonetheless dishonest and unfair. And so why don't we do that? So cheating is natural. Lots of references here. And the idea is that deception in the natural world is both ubiquitous and essential. We see it everywhere. And the most common form is mimicry. And this is very much like copying and plagiarism that we see a lot of, right? Where somebody is taking the traits or words or ideas of another and representing them as their own. In that 2017 article, I did reference the Texas coral snake versus the Mexican milk snake, and how the latter was mimicking the former, right, to survive, to seem poisonous when it's not, or orchids that for the sake of, for the purpose of reproductive success, RS, mimic either the scent, right, or a visual aspect of insects like bees to produce for success in reproduction. Nonetheless, despite being natural and normal, cheating is unethical. And Darwin himself speculated this in The Descent of Man, where that any social animal would eventually acquire some sort of moral sense or conscience. And that's been written about widely in a number of books. One of my favorite theories that I use really comes from Jonathan Haidt and the moral foundations theory, where he talks about these intuitive ethics that have evolved over time to suppress and regulate our selfishness and therefore make possible social life. And fairness and cheating being, one of the top ones here, right? Treating others equally versus not lying or cheating to them. And there's a tension there, right? Then we have the capacity to behave in bad ways, to deceive others, as well as to be honest. And E.O. Wilson captures this well, that we are these genetic, chimera, capable of being sinner and saint, or champions of truth and hypocrites. So that leads us to the problem and paradox, as it were, of academic misconduct. Many students believe that it's wrong, but do it anyway, and therefore find themselves in this state of cognitive dissonance. We call this the judgment-action gap in moral psychology. It's also known as the thought-action problem. But this idea, right, that I have a judgment or a belief that something is wrong, but I find myself doing it anyway, and judgment being necessary but insufficient for action. And of course, we see this with cognitive dissonance, right? And this inconsistency, right? This gap creates dissonance, unease that we want to resolve. And we can do so through a number of ways. We can change our beliefs, we can change our actions, we can change our attributions to help tamp down that dissonance. So I could say that cheating's not wrong. Change the belief. I could not do it. But what we're really getting at here, and what's most commonly the case, is that students aren't changing their beliefs or their actions. They're just changing their attributions, right? And saying it's not my fault. They're in fact changing their causal attributions, right? From internal responsibility to externalizing that responsibility, and doing so through various moral mechanisms of moral disengagement to end up in the state of being able to cheat and not feel guilty. From a moral psychology perspective, that's getting at this third component here, commitment, or sometimes called motivation, where, I'm going along, I see cheating is wrong, but instead of taking personal responsibility, I disengage that sense of responsibility. And that's where these mechanisms of moral disengagement come in. There are a number of them. They've been written about by particularly Bandura, but before him, Anna Freud wrote a lot about him, and sociologists as well. I'm calling them techniques of neutralization. Some of the more common ones, of course, are displacement of responsibility. Friend made me do it, or diffusion altogether. Everybody's doing it. This is just what happens here. Euphemistic labeling, advantageous comparison, attribution of blame to the teacher. Not my fault, bad teacher. Denial of crime, I didn't do it, or a victim. Nobody gets hurt, right? I'm just hurting myself. We hear that a lot. And even moral justification. I did it for somebody, my parents. It was a sort of a higher sort of a priority or good being served through the misconduct. We don't really see dehumanization used in this context, but that is a very serious form of moral disengagement that allows people to commit a number of atrocities. So how might we prevent this and we get students to achieve with integrity, which is what we want? Well, very quickly, make it moral. Make it clear that that asking misconduct is not simply a violation of school rules, but also morally wrong. Helping them take personal responsibility and making a commitment to achieving with integrity, making them aware of these mechanisms of moral and disengagement so they don't rationalize and they reject rationalizations for cheating and others, and creating a culture of integrity, which I've written about in other places, including the 2019 article there in Change Magazine. That's all I have time for. Thanks for your time and attention. If you got questions, comments, or suggestions, please email me. I'd love to answer them. Thank you.